The applause filled the grand hall, a wave of sound washing over the elegantly dressed attendees. My program, the one I'd meticulously crafted for months, the one that would change lives, had just secured major funding. But the name announced, the one bathed in the spotlight, it wasn't mine. I'm Celine Holloway, and for over a decade, I was the quiet architect behind the Holloway Philanthropic Trust's most impactful educational initiatives. I once believed that hard work and genuine dedication, even in the shadows, would speak for themselves, especially within an organization bearing my family's name. I discovered that some spotlights are deliberately angled away, and some voices are intentionally muted. If you've ever poured your heart into a cause, only to watch someone else wear the laurels, you'll want to hear how I finally stepped out of the silence. For as long as I can remember, I've been the quiet one in the Holloway family. While my older sister, Adriana, possessed a natural magnetism, a way of commanding a room with her voice and her smile, I found my solace in the intricate details, in the careful construction of ideas. At the Holloway Philanthropic Trust (HPT), as we called it, this translated into my role as head of program research and development. Our family's foundation was dedicated to improving educational opportunities for underprivileged youth, a mission I believed in with every fiber of my being. I wasn't just an employee. I was a Holloway, and this work felt like an extension of my very identity. I spent countless hours, often late into the night, poring over data, researching best practices, and designing programs that I hoped would make a real difference. There was the comprehensive scholarship model, the one that took me nearly 6 months to refine, ensuring it wasn't just about funding but about mentorship and holistic support. Then there was the soft skills training program for high school seniors, a curriculum I built from scratch, tailoring each module to address the specific challenges these young people faced. The quiet hum of my computer, the rustle of research papers, the solitary satisfaction of a well-crafted proposal, these were the sounds and sensations of my professional life. I found a deep intrinsic joy in seeing these ideas take root, in knowing that somewhere, a young person's path might be a little brighter because of the work I did in the quiet corners of our foundation. Adriana, as the executive director, was the public face of HPT. She was brilliant in front of cameras, charming with donors, a natural at networking. Our mother, Eleanor Sr., the chairwoman of the board, often remarked on Adriana's innate leadership qualities. I didn't mind being in the background, not initially. I told myself that what mattered was the impact, the collective good. If my research helped Adriana secure funding, if my program designs led to successful outcomes, then wasn't that enough? There were early signs, of course, little whispers of unease that I chose to dismiss. A detailed analytical report I prepared would be summarized by Adriana in a meeting with educational partners, presented as her own insightful conclusions. Praise for a successful initiative would often be directed towards Adriana's vision, with little or no mention of the foundational work, the meticulous planning that had gone into it. I'd feel a small tight knot in my stomach, but I'd smooth it over, telling myself it was family, it was for the greater good. The mission was paramount, and I truly believed that in a family organization, in a philanthropic trust, fairness and integrity would ultimately prevail. That my contributions, even if unspoken, were seen and valued. I suppose I was a bit naive, clinging to an ideal of how things should be, rather than seeing them for what they were becoming. The unease I'd initially dismissed began to grow, like a hairline crack in a polished veneer. It started subtly, then became more pronounced. The Future Mentors Program, an initiative I'd poured my heart into for nearly a year, connecting students from underserved communities with professionals in their desired fields, was one such instance. I'd researched similar models, conducted pilot studies, drafted every guideline, every training module. When it was time to present it to the board and key potential donors, Adriana took the lead. And she was, as always, captivating. She spoke of her vision for empowering youth, of the innovative approach she had conceptualized. My name was mentioned, almost as an afterthought, as someone who had assisted with the groundwork. The program was a resounding success, lauded for its impact. Adriana received the accolades, the public recognition. I watched from the sidelines, a familiar ache settling in my chest. Then there was Marcus Thorne. He joined HPT as a bright, eager junior staffer, and I'd taken him under my wing, mentoring him, sharing my research methodologies. He was a quick learner. Too quick, perhaps, in learning the dynamics of our office. Soon, I noticed Adriana began to delegate tasks to him. Tasks that involved polishing my reports, refining my proposals. He started presenting segments of my work in internal meetings, always introduced as part of Adriana's team. The whispers in the hallways became more frequent, more pointed. Celine is a great researcher, very thorough, but she doesn't have that executive presence. Or Adriana, now she's the one who can really sell an idea, she has the charisma to lead. It was as if my quiet dedication was being reframed as a lack of leadership, my meticulous work a sign of being stuck in the weeds. I felt a growing sense of isolation, a feeling that the narrative about me was being written by others, and it wasn't a flattering one. I tried to address it once in a small team meeting. I chose my words carefully, suggesting that perhaps we could be more specific in crediting individual contributions to projects, for clarity and team morale. My mother, Eleanor Sr., who was present, cut me off, not unkindly but firmly. "Celine dear," she'd said, her smile perfectly in place, "we need to project a united front, a strong singular leadership voice for HPT. It's about the overall brand, the collective impact." Her words, though couched in professional speak, felt like a dismissal, a clear message that my concerns were secondary to the carefully curated image of the foundation, an image largely centered around Adriana. The disappointment was a cold stone in my stomach. The trust I'd placed in the inherent fairness of our family, our organization, was beginning to erode. I started paying closer attention not just to the words spoken, but to the silences, the omissions, the subtle shifts in how information flowed, and who was given the platform. The cracks were no longer just visible, they were widening. The turning point, the moment the lingering unease solidified into a chilling certainty, came with the National Education Innovators Award. It was a prestigious honor, one that HPT had aspired to for years. And we won. The award was specifically for the Future Mentors program, the very program I had conceived, designed, and meticulously nurtured from a mere concept into a thriving reality. I remembered the late nights, the endless revisions, the small pilot groups I'd run myself to gather feedback. The excitement I felt when the first success stories started trickling in from students whose lives had been tangibly changed. The award ceremony was a grand affair, held in a glittering ballroom. Adriana and my mother, Eleanor Sr., accepted the award on behalf of HPT. Adriana, radiant in a designer gown, gave an eloquent acceptance speech, thanking the awards committee, the donors, the dedicated team at HPT. She spoke of her passion for education, her commitment to creating opportunities. My mother stood beside her, beaming with pride. My name was never mentioned. Not once. Not even a passing acknowledgement of the person who had been the architect, the driving force behind the award-winning program. I sat in the audience, a polite smile fixed on my face, while inside something fractured. It wasn't just an oversight. It felt like a deliberate erasure. Later that evening, at a small private celebration for the HPT leadership team, I overheard a conversation that would replay in my mind for months. I'd stepped away to get some air, standing in a dimly lit corridor just off the main room. I heard my mother's voice, low and confidential, followed by Adriana's. "Celine does her research work well," Adriana, Eleanor Sr. was saying. "She's thorough. But you, my dear, you're the one who knows how to package it, how to make it compelling, how to bring in the funding. It's better for the foundation's image if she focuses on the back end. Let her stay in the background, it's for the best." Adriana murmured something in agreement. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Better for the foundation's image. Let her stay in the background. It wasn't incompetence or a lack of charisma they saw in me. It was a calculated decision to keep me there. My contributions were valuable, essential even, but only if they remained unseen, unattributed, fueling Adriana's rise, burnishing the family name through her. The pain was sharp, a deep, visceral betrayal. This wasn't just about professional recognition. This was my family, my own mother and sister, consciously and systematically diminishing my role, my very presence. That night I went home, and the usual calm of my apartment felt suffocating. I told my husband, David, everything, not in a flood of tears, but in a quiet, measured recounting of the award, the overheard conversation, the slow dawning of this unbearable truth. He listened, as he always did, with patience and an unnerving stillness. When I finished, he didn't offer platitudes or outrage. He simply said, "Celine, you need to start documenting everything. Every email, every draft, every meeting note. Objectively, factually." His advice was practical, devoid of emotion, but it was exactly what I needed. It gave me a focus, a sense of agency in a situation where I felt utterly powerless. That night, I created a new, encrypted folder on my personal laptop. I named it The Ledger. It was a small act of defiance, a silent vow that I would not let my story be completely erased. The melody of my work had been muted, my signature all but erased, but I would somehow find a way to reclaim it. The slights, the subtle dismissals, they began to feel less like accidental oversights and more like carefully orchestrated moves. There was an important networking event HPT was hosting, a gathering of key educational partners, potential major donors, and representatives from local school districts. I was scheduled to give a brief presentation on the impact assessment of one of our long-running literacy programs. Solid data, compelling success stories, all meticulously compiled by me. Just minutes before I was due to speak, as I was reviewing my notes at a small table near the refreshment area, Adriana approached. She was carrying a tray with a tall glass of iced tea and a plate of canapés. With a dazzling smile and a cheerful, "Oh, Celine, there you are." She made a sudden, awkward movement. The iced tea arced through the air, a sticky amber deluge, right onto my presentation slides and my carefully organized notes. "Oh my goodness, Celine. I am so terribly sorry," she gasped, her eyes wide with feigned horror. "How clumsy of me." She fussed around with a napkin, dabbing ineffectually at the sodden papers, making the mess worse. My slides were ruined, my notes a blur of ink. I looked up and caught a fleeting expression in her eyes. A flicker of something that wasn't remorse, something almost satisfied. It was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual concerned facade. I managed a tight smile, mumbled something about it being all right, and tried to salvage what I could. My presentation, when I finally gave it, was disjointed, relying on memory and hastily scribbled bullet points. I felt flustered, unprofessional. Later, I saw Mr. Arthur Jennings, our long-serving head of finance, looking at me with a thoughtful, almost pitying expression. He'd been standing nearby and had witnessed the whole accident. He didn't say anything, but his gaze lingered. That evening, an email from Adriana landed in my inbox. Subject: "So sorry about today." The body of the email was full of effusive apologies, reassurances that these things happen. And then, tucked away at the end, a seemingly unrelated note: "By the way, that wonderful new youth leadership initiative you were brainstorming? I've asked Marcus Thorne to take the lead on developing it further. I think it's a great opportunity for him to step up and showcase his abilities. He's really coming into his own, don't you think?" The Youth Leadership Initiative, it was more than a brainstorm. It was a concept I'd been quietly researching for months, a detailed outline already taking shape in my personal files. This wasn't just an accident with the tea, this was a pattern, a systematic undermining, a public humiliation, followed by the appropriation of my work. The coldness I felt wasn't just from the damp papers. It was a chill that settled deep in my bones. This wasn't just about being overlooked anymore. This felt like a deliberate campaign to diminish me, to keep me small. The sweet deception of her apologies only made the bitter brew of reality harder to swallow. But with that coldness came a new clarity. I would not break. I would not raise my voice. But I would remember. And I would continue to fill the ledger. The days that followed the iced tea incident were different. Outwardly, I maintained my composure, continued my work with the same diligence. But inwardly, a shift had occurred. The hurt was still there, a dull ache, but it was now overlaid with a quiet, steely resolve. The ledger became my silent confidant, a meticulous record of every slight, every stolen idea, every dismissive remark. I documented dates, times, specific phrases, attached copies of original drafts and email chains. It wasn't about dwelling on the negativity. It was about arming myself with facts. David, my husband, was a steadfast source of support. He never told me what to do, but he listened, asked probing questions, and helped me see patterns I might have otherwise missed. His calm, analytical perspective was an anchor in the emotional storm I was weathering internally. One afternoon, while reviewing some budget proposals, I stumbled upon something that made my breath catch. Adriana and Marcus Thorne were listed as co-authors on a major grant proposal to a prestigious international foundation. The project title was Global Education Pathways, and as I read through the executive summary, a sickening sense of déjà vu washed over me. The core concepts, the innovative educational model for high school students, even some of the specific phrasing, it was all drawn directly from a comprehensive framework I had developed and presented internally nearly a year prior. A framework that had been shelved at the time, with Adriana citing budgetary constraints and a need to focus on existing programs. Now here it was repackaged, rebranded with their names emblazoned on it. My work stolen and presented as their own on a global stage. My role as head of program research and development gave me access to certain financial reports. Driven by a new, unsettling curiosity, I began to look more closely at departmental expenditures. I found a series of significant expenses related to Adriana's international outreach trips, first-class flights, luxury hotels, expensive dinners, all under the guise of partnership development and donor cultivation. Yet, when I cross-referenced these trips with actual new partnerships or significant donations, the results were underwhelming. There were also several small, high-profile but ultimately ineffective pilot projects that Adriana had championed, projects that consumed considerable resources but yielded little tangible impact for the communities we were meant to serve. It wasn't just my work being stolen. It felt like the very mission of HPT was being compromised for personal aggrandizement. I discussed these new findings with David. He listened intently, his brow furrowed. "Celine," he said, his voice calm but firm, "this is no longer just about professional recognition. There are potential issues here regarding governance, possibly even fiduciary responsibility. You have a duty not just to yourself but to the foundation, to its beneficiaries, to ensure that things are being managed ethically." He suggested that simply confronting Adriana or my mother would likely be futile. They had already demonstrated their willingness to dismiss my concerns. "You need to present this to the entire board of directors," he advised. "Formally, with irrefutable evidence. You need to be strategic." He didn't offer to fight my battles for me, but his words gave me courage. He helped me organize my evidence, structure my thoughts, and prepare for what I knew would be the most difficult confrontation of my life. The silent scribe was no longer just recording. She was preparing to speak. The HPT Annual Board of Directors meeting was always a formal affair, held in the Foundation's largest conference room, the long mahogany table gleaming under the recessed lights. This year there was an added buzz of anticipation. Adriana was scheduled to present her flagship proposal for the Global Education Pathways Initiative, the one built on my stolen framework. She was seeking a substantial budget allocation and aiming to position this as HPT's bold new strategic direction under her visionary leadership. I knew this was my moment, perhaps my only chance. I had formally requested a slot on the agenda, vaguely titled Review of Program Development Integrity and Attribution. My mother had raised an eyebrow but hadn't objected. Perhaps she thought it was another minor complaint I'd eventually let go of. When my turn came, a hush fell over the room. I could feel Adriana's eyes on me, a mixture of curiosity and perhaps a hint of annoyance. My mother watched with her usual carefully neutral expression. I took a slow breath, my heart pounding against my ribs, but my voice when I spoke was steady. I began by reaffirming my commitment to HPT's mission. Then, calmly, methodically, I laid out my case. I didn't raise my voice, didn't resort to accusations. I simply presented the facts. Using the projector, I displayed side-by-side comparisons. My original program proposals, complete with timestamps and email trails, next to the new initiatives presented by Adriana and Marcus. The similarities were undeniable, the instances of direct appropriation clear. I showed the evolution of the Future Mentors program, from my initial concept notes to the final award-winning framework. I presented my foundational research for the Global Education Pathways, highlighting the core tenets that had been lifted verbatim. I then touched upon the patterns of project management, the lack of consistent attribution, and the process by which credit seemed to be systematically diverted. I even very carefully raised questions about certain budgetary allocations, presenting data on expenditures versus demonstrable outcomes for some of Adriana's high-profile but low-impact ventures, suggesting a need for greater scrutiny and accountability. Throughout my presentation, the room was utterly silent, save for the click of my mouse and the quiet hum of the projector. Adriana's initial confident smirk slowly faded, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief, then growing anger. My mother's composure remained, but I could see a tightening around her jaw, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. When I finished, there was a beat of profound silence. Then Mr. Arthur Jennings, our head of finance, cleared his throat. As the keeper of the Foundation's financial records and someone who has reviewed program proposals for many years, he said, his voice carrying the weight of his long tenure, I can corroborate much of what Ms. Celine Holloway has presented regarding the timelines and original authorship of several key documents. There have been inconsistencies that I myself have noted over time but hesitated to bring forward. His words were like a dam breaking. Other board members, initially hesitant, began to ask questions. Sharp, probing questions directed at Adriana, at my mother. Adriana stammered, denied, tried to deflect, but the evidence was too compelling, too meticulously documented. My mother attempted to regain control, to steer the conversation back to unity and positive momentum, but her usual authority seemed to waver. The carefully constructed facade of HPT's flawless leadership was crumbling. Right there in that silent, stunned boardroom, the reckoning bell had tolled, and truth finally was stepping into the light. The immediate aftermath of that board meeting was tumultuous. The board voted to commission a full independent audit of HPT's programmatic and financial processes. Adriana was placed on administrative leave, pending the results. My mother, Eleanor Sr., while not formally sanctioned, found her influence within the board significantly diminished. The carefully crafted image of serene, unified leadership had been shattered. In the midst of this upheaval, the board approached me. They asked if I would consider stepping in as interim executive director to guide HPT through the audit and help stabilize the organization. It wasn't a role I had ever sought, but I knew with a clarity that surprised me that I had to accept. Not for power, not for vindication, but for the mission of HPT, for the young people we served. My focus wasn't on retribution. It was on rebuilding. The first thing I did was to work with the remaining leadership and Mr. Jennings to draft new, transparent policies on project authorship, contribution recognition, and ethical conduct. We established clear workflows, ensuring that every voice had a chance to be heard, every contribution properly credited. Marcus Thorne, looking chastened and genuinely remorseful, offered me his resignation. I accepted it, wishing him well, but also making it clear that the culture at HPT was changing. Mr. Jennings became an invaluable ally, his quiet integrity and deep institutional knowledge proving essential as we navigated the complexities of reform. Slowly, steadily, HPT began to find its footing again. The audit, when it was completed, confirmed many of the concerns I had raised, leading to further, more permanent changes in leadership and governance. The work was challenging, demanding, but for the first time in years, I felt a sense of lightness, of purpose unburdened by resentment or the need to fight for recognition. My passion for our mission, which had been dulled by years of being overlooked, reignited. I was no longer the silent architect. I was leading openly, with the full support of a board that now valued transparency and genuine merit. One afternoon, several months later, my mother requested a meeting. We sat in my new office, Adriana's old office, the one I had redecorated with simpler, less ostentatious furnishings. She looked older, more tired than I had ever seen her. There was no direct apology, not in words, but as she spoke about the future of HPT, about the importance of the work we were doing, there was a new tone in her voice. A quiet respect, perhaps even a grudging admiration. "You've always been the diligent one, Celine," she said, her gaze resting on a framed photo of some of our scholarship recipients. Perhaps we didn't always see how strong that diligence could be. It wasn't everything, but it was something. A small, almost imperceptible shift in the narrative she had held for so long. As she left, she paused at the door. "The foundation is in good hands," she said, and then she was gone. I knew then that the legacy of HPT and my own place within it was finally being rewritten, not by power or by image, but by truth. People often say that time heals all wounds. I'm not entirely sure I believe that. I think it's truth, faced and spoken, that holds the real power to heal. When you choose to stand up, not with anger, but with the quiet strength of evidence and conviction. The Holloway Philanthropic Trust continues its mission, but it operates on a different foundation now, one of transparency, where every contribution is valued, every voice is heard. I once thought silence was a virtue, a form of humility, but silence can also become an invisible cage, one of your own making. There are times, of course, when silence is necessary, to listen, to observe, to gather your strength. And then there comes a moment when you must speak your truth, not to tear anyone down, but to reclaim the space for yourself to simply be, to contribute, and to be recognized for who you are and what you do. If you've ever felt like a ghost in your own life story, if your work and your passion have ever been claimed or dismissed by others, please know that you are not alone. The journey to reclaim your value and your voice can be challenging, but it is always, always worth it. Please share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, because every shared experience holds its own power and its own resonance. If you found a part of yourself in Celine's journey, please consider subscribing. We at TK Revenge Story will continue to bring you stories of resilience and the pursuit of justice. And if this story touched you, a little support through super thanks helps us continue to amplify voices that need to be heard. Sometimes sharing and giving are also part of our own healing. Thank you for listening.